On the surface, the Jennings family looked like the kind of couple you'd see on a postcard of suburban America. A neat two-story house with white shutters, a trimmed lawn, and a front porch swing that creaked softly in the evening breeze. To the neighbors, Clara and Anthony Jennings were the definition of stability. 20 years of marriage, Sunday church service, polite greetings at the mailbox, and backyard barbecues where Anthony always flipped burgers while Clara poured sweet tea with a smile. If anyone had asked, Clara would have told them she was blessed. She had married the man she believed was her rock, steady, dependable, kind. And for 2 decades, she worked tirelessly to nurture their home, to create a life that looked, at least from the outside, nearly perfect. But perfection is often nothing more than paint covering a crack in the wall. Clara was a woman molded by tradition. Raised in a small Georgia town by parents who believed in loyalty and keeping appearances, she had carried those values into her marriage. From the start, she gave Anthony everything: her trust, her devotion, her youth. Love is sacrifice, her mother once told her on her wedding day, and Clara had taken those words as gospel. Anthony, meanwhile, was quiet, some might say reserved. He worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. His life was numbers, balance sheets, long hours spent at a desk under fluorescent lights. At home, he was gentle, never raised his voice, never struck her, never gave her reason to doubt his loyalty. If anything, his calm predictability made him seem like the safe harbor Clara could always return to. And yet, there were shadows in their marriage that outsiders couldn't see. In the early years, passion had come easily, the way it does when 2 people are still discovering each other. But as the years stretched on, Clara noticed something shift. Their intimacy grew rare, strained, almost mechanical when it did happen. Anthony always had excuses: stress at work, headaches, fatigue. Clara would press her lips into a smile, swallow her disappointment, and tell herself, marriage isn't all about sex. Marriage is about companionship. Still, late at night, staring at the ceiling while Anthony slept beside her, Clara sometimes felt an ache she couldn't name. A loneliness that had nothing to do with being alone. Neighbors never guessed. To them, the Jennings household was a picture of endurance. "They've made it 20 years, one woman down the street would say admiringly. "These days, that's rare. They must really love each other." Clara would hear those comments and force herself to nod, though inside her chest something felt hollow. The Jennings marriage was built on unspoken rules. Clara didn't pry too much into Anthony's world, and Anthony didn't invite her into his. When she asked questions about his past, about why he avoided reunions or old friends, he would shrug and change the subject. She learned not to push. "Let sleeping dogs lie," he'd murmur, his lips brushing her forehead, and she'd try to convince herself it was enough. But deep down, Clara always carried the sense that Anthony was holding something back. Something larger than the normal silences that exist in every marriage. On Sundays, sitting together in the same pew at church, Clara would watch other couples, hands intertwined, shoulders leaning close during hymns, and wonder if her marriage had ever truly been that open. Still, she smiled. Still, she performed the role of devoted wife. Behind closed doors, though, Clara sometimes stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at her reflection, whispering, "What am I missing? What don't I know?" The irony was cruel. The Jennings marriage had all the markers of success: financial security, social respect, 2 decades without scandal. But Clara had begun to feel like an actress in a play she didn't audition for, repeating lines of affection while her heart quietly bled for something real. She never voiced it aloud. She never told her friends, her family, or even Anthony himself. To the outside world, she kept the mask intact. But the cracks in her marriage were widening beneath the surface, like fault lines deep underground, waiting for the right moment to split the earth wide open. That moment was coming, and when it arrived, it would shatter not only her faith in her husband, but her very belief in love, marriage, and truth itself. The trouble in Clara and Anthony's marriage didn't erupt overnight. Like water seeping slowly through stone, it worked quietly, invisibly, until the damage became impossible to ignore. In the beginning, their marriage had been filled with warmth. They cooked together, laughed over silly TV shows, and planned vacations they couldn't always afford. Clara remembered those first anniversaries when Anthony would surprise her with flowers or leave little notes on the kitchen counter. Back then, She believed she had chosen wisely. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't wild, but he was solid. He was the kind of man you could build a future with. But as the years wore on, something changed. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even obvious to anyone else. It was a subtle pulling away, like the tide receding inch by inch. At first, Clara told herself it was normal. Every marriage loses a little spark, she thought. Couples settle into routines. Comfort replaces passion. But the routines in the Jennings household didn't feel like comfort. They felt like distance. Anthony became harder to reach. He buried himself in work, stayed late at the office, and came home with exhaustion etched into his face. When Clara tried to close the gap, he put up invisible walls. One night, as she reached for him in bed, he shifted away slightly, murmuring, "I'm just tired, Clara. Tomorrow, okay?" Tomorrow became next week. Next week became next month. Eventually, intimacy between them became so rare that Clara stopped asking. Each rejection carved a deeper wound into her heart. The silence grew heavier. Meals at the dining table turned into exchanges about bills and grocery lists. Vacations stopped. Even their laughter, once so easy, became scarce. Clara began to feel like a roommate, not a wife. Yet in public, the image never cracked. At church, Anthony's arm rested on the pew behind her shoulders. At neighborhood cookouts, they smiled for photos. 20 years strong, people would say, and Clara would smile tightly, her jaw aching from the effort. Inside, though, she was screaming. She tried to bring it up once. A quiet Friday night, dishes done, TV humming softly in the background. Clara took a deep breath and said, "Anthony, are you happy with me?" He froze, his eyes fixed on the muted glow of the television. "Of course I am," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Then why does it feel like you're not here? Like you're somewhere else even when you're sitting right next to me?" Anthony sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're overthinking again. You always do this. I've just been stressed, that's all." His tone wasn't cruel, but it shut her down. Clara swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. But inside, the ache only grew sharper. She began to notice things she couldn't ignore. Anthony's reluctance to change clothes in front of her. The way he always dimmed the lights during intimacy. His aversion to doctor's appointments, even routine checkups. He once canceled a physical exam at the last minute, claiming work had called him in. At the time, Clara brushed it off. People have quirks, she told herself. Some men are just private. But looking back, she realized those moments weren't quirks. They were warnings. Signs that her husband was hiding something far larger than stress. Her loneliness deepened. On sleepless nights, she would sit by the window, watching the glow of street lamps, asking herself hard questions. Why doesn't he want me? Am I not enough? Is there someone else? The thought of Anthony cheating cut her deeply, yet in a strange way, it almost felt like an answer she could live with. Betrayal was devastating, but at least it was an explanation. What haunted her more was the possibility that he wasn't cheating, that the reason for his distance was something darker, something unspeakable. Still, Clara endured. Divorce was never an option she entertained. She had invested 20 years, built her entire identity around being Anthony's wife. Walking away would feel like admitting her life had been a lie. So she held on. She swallowed her doubts, smiled when she needed to, and buried the rest deep inside. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Secrets cannot be buried forever. And in the Jennings household, the biggest secret of all was waiting for the moment when it could no longer be contained. That moment was approaching, and when it arrived, it wouldn't just expose Anthony. It would destroy everything Clara thought she knew about love, marriage, and trust. It was a stormy night in late October, the kind that rattled the windows and made the trees groan like old bones. Clara remembered it vividly, not just because of what happened, but because of the way the entire evening seemed cloaked in a strange, uneasy energy. Anthony had come home earlier than usual. He carried takeout instead of briefcases, Chinese food in paper cartons. They ate quietly, sitting across from one another at the dining table while the rain tapped against the glass. For once, Anthony seemed relaxed, almost lighthearted, as if he were trying to close the distance that had grown between them. "Maybe we should go upstairs early tonight," he said, not meeting her eyes. Clara froze with her fork halfway to her mouth. The words sounded ordinary, but coming from Anthony, they landed like thunder. For months, years, really, he had dodged every attempt at intimacy. Now he was suggesting it? Her heart leapt, a fragile flicker of hope. Okay, she whispered, careful not to sound too eager. Upstairs, the bedroom felt different. The storm outside dimmed the moonlight, leaving the room half swallowed in shadow. Anthony lit a candle on the dresser, a small flame that flickered against the walls. Clara told herself to be patient, to let the moment unfold. Maybe this was the breakthrough she'd been praying for. Maybe her husband was finally coming back to her. As they kissed, Clara felt the years of distance blur for just a second. She wanted to believe, wanted to silence the doubts that had plagued her nights. But beneath her hands, something felt off. The rhythm, the touch, it was mechanical, stilted. She tried to ignore it, until suddenly, everything shattered. In a single, horrifying instant, she felt something shift. A sound, soft but unmistakable, broke through the dark. And then, it happened. The object slipped, fell, landed with a dull, plastic thud on the hardwood floor. For a moment, Clara's brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. On the floor beside their bed lay a prosthetic phallus, cold, artificial, and grotesquely out of place. The world seemed to tilt. Her breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening like a vice. She looked at Anthony, whose face had drained of color. His eyes widened, desperate, pleading. "Clara, wait," he began, his voice trembling. Clara's entire body shook. What is that?" Her voice came out strangled, barely a whisper. Anthony reached for her hands, but she yanked them away. "I can explain." "Explain?" She laughed, but it wasn't laughter, it was hysteria, the sound of 20 years of trust collapsing in a single heartbeat. "For 2 decades, Anthony. For 20 years what the hell have you done to me?" Her mind raced through every moment of their marriage, every excuse, every dimmed light, every rejection. It all clicked into place with brutal clarity. The distance, the secrecy, the strange hesitations. She had thought she wasn't enough, had blamed herself. But now she understood, it was never about her. "You lied to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You lied every day, every night, for 20 years. Anthony's hands trembled. "I didn't want to lose you, Clara. I was afraid." "Afraid?" She stepped back, tears blurring her vision. "Afraid of what? That I'd leave? That I'd find out my entire marriage was a goddamn performance?" His voice cracked. "I love you. Everything I did was because I love you." Clara's rage boiled over. "Love," she spat. "You don't get to use that word. Love doesn't deceive. Love doesn't trick someone into wasting their life on a lie." The candle flickered wildly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. Outside, the storm roared, thunder shaking the house as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness. Clara's chest heaved with every breath, fury warring with heartbreak. She wanted to scream, to hit, to claw back every year stolen from her. Her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging crescents into her palms. Anthony, panicked, tried again. "Clara, please. You have to understand. I was born different. I didn't choose this. I only chose you." His confession sliced her open. She wasn't angry about what he was. She was enraged by the lie. "You should have told me," she whispered, her voice icy. "You should have given me the choice." Anthony's lips quivered. "I thought I'd lose you." Clara's eyes burned with tears. "You lost me the moment that hit the floor." For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the storm outside. Clara stared at the prosthetic on the floor, then at the man she thought she knew. The man who had shared her bed, her life, her dreams. And in that silence, something inside her broke. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't just betrayal. It was grief. The death of the marriage she had believed in. The death of the man she thought she loved. Her heart pounded like a war drum, her breath ragged. She felt like she was drowning, clawing for air that wasn't there. When she finally spoke again, her voice was cold steel. "You destroyed us, Anthony. And you destroyed me." That night marked the beginning of the end. The mask had fallen. The secret was out. And Clara Jennings, the loyal wife who had built her entire life on trust and sacrifice, had reached the breaking point. From that moment forward, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. Clara's words hung in the air like a blade. Sharp, final, irreversible. "You destroyed us, Anthony. And you destroyed me." Anthony lowered himself to the edge of the bed, his face pale, his hands trembling as he tried to gather pieces of the life that had just exploded in front of them. The storm outside raged on, wind lashing against the windows, as though the world itself had turned violent in sympathy with Clara's fury. "Clara, listen to me," he begged, his voice quivering. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was terrified. Terrified you'd leave. Terrified no one could ever love me if they knew the truth." Clara stared at him, her tears burning trails down her face. "The truth? You mean the truth you hid from me for 20 years? The truth you buried every time you touched me in the dark? God, Anthony, you didn't just lie to me. You stole my life." He dropped his head into his hands, shoulders shaking. "When we met, you were the first person who ever looked at me like I was enough. I thought if I told you, it would all be over before it even began. And I couldn't face that. So I kept it to myself. I thought if I could just be the man you needed, maybe it wouldn't matter." His words fell heavy, but instead of soothing her, they cut deeper. Clara's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. "Didn't matter?" she hissed. "You think my choice doesn't matter? My marriage, my vows, my faith, they were built on a lie. You didn't love me, Anthony. You loved the mask you put on every single day." Anthony looked up, eyes wet. "That's not true. I loved you more than anything. Every decision I made, even the wrong ones, were because I couldn't bear to lose you. Then why do I feel like I've been sleeping next to a stranger for 20 years? Clara shot back. Her voice cracked, raw from the weight of betrayal. Silence lingered, broken only by the storm hammering against the house. Clara's mind raced back through the years, the excuses, the dim lights, the secrets she had swallowed. Every unanswered question now made sense, and yet the clarity felt like poison. She sank into the armchair across the room, her hands gripping the sides as though to steady herself. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me?" she asked, her voice low, dangerous. "You've made me question every memory, every kiss, every promise. Was any of it real, Anthony? Or was I just your cover?" Anthony flinched at the word. "No, you were never just that. You were my reason to live. Without you, his voice cracked. "I didn't think I could survive." Clara shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "You should have trusted me. You should have given me the choice to love you for who you are, or to walk away. Instead, you trapped me in your lie. You chained me to it for 2 decades. That's not love. That's prison." Anthony reached across the space between them, desperation in his movements. "Please, Clara, I'm begging you. Don't let this destroy us. We can move forward. I'll tell you everything, no more secrets. Just don't give up on me now." Her eyes met his, blazing with a fury he had never seen in her before. "You don't get to ask me for forgiveness. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. You've already destroyed the only thing I had left to give, my trust." The weight of her words pressed down like a tombstone. Anthony's lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. He knew, in that moment, that the fortress of lies he had built was collapsing, and there was nothing left to shield him from the wreckage. Clara stood, her body trembling, her voice shaking with grief and rage. "Do you know what's worse than cheating, Anthony? It's not knowing who the hell I've been married to all these years. You didn't just betray me. You erased me. Every choice I made was based on a lie you crafted. And I'll never get those years back." Anthony's face crumpled as he whispered, "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" Clara's voice rose, raw and jagged. "No, Anthony. You were protecting yourself. And now, you've left me with nothing but ashes." The storm outside began to quiet, but inside that bedroom, the chaos only deepened. Clara's sobs filled the silence. Anthony sat paralyzed, his secret laid bare, his marriage unraveling before his eyes. There are betrayals that wound, and then there are betrayals that hollow you out until you're nothing but a shell. For Clara Jennings, this was the latter. The man she had trusted with her entire life was gone, not because he left, but because he had never truly been there. And as she looked at him through tear-stained eyes, she knew something irreversible had shifted. The woman she had been for 20 years was gone. What rose in her place was someone raw, broken, and ready to lash out in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The silence after Clara's words felt like a cavern, deep, endless, suffocating. Anthony sat slumped at the edge of the bed, his hands twisting together as though he could somehow hold on to a marriage already slipping through his fingers. Clara stood across the room, her back rigid, her chest heaving. She felt stripped bare, like every illusion she had clung to for 20 years had been torn away in an instant. The man before her wasn't the husband she thought she knew. He was a stranger. Clara, Anthony whispered, his voice cracking. Please. I can fix this. Fix this. Her laugh came out sharp, hollow, a sound even she didn't recognize. You can't fix a grave, Anthony. And that's what this is. Our marriage, my trust, my entire life. Buried. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armchair, fury and heartbreak coursing through her veins like poison. She thought of all the nights she had lain awake, wondering what was wrong with her, wondering why her husband turned away, blaming herself for a distance she couldn't close. And now she knew. It had never been about her at all. Her voice dropped low, dangerous. You didn't just lie to me. You stole from me. 20 years. Do you understand that? You took the best years of my life and turned them into a goddamn fraud. Anthony rose slowly, his face pale. I was scared, Clara. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd leave. And I couldn't live without you. Her eyes blazed with tears. You should have let me decide that for myself. You didn't give me a choice. The storm outside had eased, but inside their bedroom the storm only intensified. Clara's grief was no longer quiet. It was screaming in her blood, demanding release. Anthony reached for her again. Please, don't let this destroy us. I'll tell you everything, Don't touch me, she snapped, shoving his hand away. Her voice rose, raw with anguish. Do you have any idea what it feels like to realize your marriage was never real? That your husband wasn't who he said he was? Anthony's eyes filled with panic. It was real, Clara. I swear it was. Every laugh, every memory, every moment, it was real to me. To you, she spat. Always about you. Your fear. Your secret. Your survival. What about me, Anthony? What about my survival? You left me drowning for 20 years. Her rage spiraled. She began pacing the room, words spilling from her like venom. You turned me into a fool. Do you know what it's like to smile in front of people, to act like the perfect wife, while my own husband hides in the shadows? You made me believe I was broken, when all along it was you living a lie. Anthony's voice shook as he pleaded. Clara, I never wanted to hurt you. I only wanted to love you. Her laughter came sharp, unhinged. Love? Don't say that word. You don't get to call this love. Love doesn't chain someone to a lie. Love doesn't erase 20 years of a woman's life. Her hands shook violently now, her nails biting into her palms. Every nerve screamed for release, for some way to silence the agony tearing through her chest. She looked at him, at the man who had deceived her for so long, and something inside her snapped. Anthony saw it in her eyes, the change. The fury that had simmered beneath her grief suddenly ignited into something darker. He took a step back. Clara, what are you doing? But it was too late. In one brutal rush, Clara lunged toward him. Her fist struck first, fueled not by reason, but by 20 years of betrayal. Anthony staggered backward, shocked, raising his arms to shield himself. Clara, stop. Please, he cried. But his voice barely reached her through the roar in her head. She struck again, her screams tearing through the air. 20 years. 20 years you stole from me. Each blow landed like thunder, a savage release of pain that words could no longer contain. Anthony tried to grab her wrists, but she twisted free, shoving him back against the dresser. The candle toppled, sending wax spilling across the wood, shadows flaring across the room. For a moment, Anthony's face softened, pleading, desperate. Clara, I'm sorry. I love you. Please. But the words only enraged her further. They sounded like poison, like the same lie she had swallowed for decades. With a cry that was part sob, part scream, Clara grabbed the first object within reach, a heavy picture frame from the dresser. Their wedding photo. The smiling couple everyone thought was perfect. She stared at it, her hands shaking. Then, with a guttural cry, she swung. The frame shattered, glass spraying across the floor. Anthony collapsed beneath the blow, blood trickling from his temple. His body went limp, sliding to the ground in silence. Clara froze, chest heaving, the broken frame still in her hand. The room smelled of candle wax, rain, and iron. Her tears blurred her vision as she stared down at Anthony's still form. The fury drained from her all at once, leaving only horror. The storm in her blood went quiet, replaced by a cold, hollow silence. She dropped the frame, the sound of glass tinkling like bells. Her voice came out a whisper, broken and terrified. What have I done? Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. Inside, the Jennings bedroom had transformed into a crime scene. The secret was out, the marriage was over, and the man she thought she knew was gone forever. Clara Jennings stood trembling in the ruins of her life, her hands stained with the price of 20 years of deceit. And nothing, no prayer, no plea, no apology, could undo what had just happened. The house was unnervingly quiet after the storm of violence. Clara stood frozen in the center of the bedroom, her chest heaving, her hands trembling, her gaze fixed on the motionless figure of Anthony sprawled across the floor. The shattered wedding frame lay nearby, its broken glass glittering under the dim candlelight. Her breath came shallow, almost strangled. She wanted to convince herself that he would stir, that he would rise, that this was not the end. But Anthony didn't move. Not a twitch, not a sound. Only the slow trickle of blood staining the hardwood floor told her that this was real, too real to ever take back. A scream tore from her throat, raw and piercing, echoing down the hallway. Across the street, neighbors jolted upright. The Jennings home had always been quiet, its walls rarely betraying anything beyond polite laughter or the hum of the TV. Tonight, though, the sounds were unmistakable, shouts, a crash, and now, a scream. "Call 911. One neighbor whispered to another as they stood at their window, peering through the rain. Within minutes, red and blue lights flashed across the darkened street. Sirens cut through the night air, growing louder until two patrol cars screeched to a halt outside the Jennings home. Inside, Clara sat on the floor, rocking back and forth, whispering through her tears. "What have I done? What have I done?" The pounding at the front door barely registered. "Police, open up." When no one answered, the officers forced their way inside, the door bursting open with a thud. Flashlights sliced through the darkened living room as the officers climbed the stairs, following the trail of Clara's sobs. "Ma'am, this is the police," one called out. They entered the bedroom, and the scene stopped them cold. Anthony Jennings lay lifeless on the floor. Blood pooled beneath his head. Clara, her nightgown spattered, sat only feet away, eyes vacant, hands clutching at nothing. One officer muttered, "Jesus," before quickly regaining composure. "Ma'am, put your hands where we can see them." Clara blinked up at them, her expression blank, almost childlike. "I didn't mean to, he lied to me. He lied for 20 years. The officers exchanged glances. This wasn't the first time they'd seen a crime of passion, but the pain in Clara's voice was haunting. "Ma'am, stand up slowly," the lead officer instructed, keeping his tone firm but calm. Clara obeyed, rising shakily to her feet. Her knees nearly buckled beneath her. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, she whispered again, "He lied to me. He lied to me." The officer guided her toward the door. "You can explain everything at the station, ma'am." Downstairs, more units had arrived. A stretcher was wheeled in, though everyone in the room knew there was no urgency left. Paramedics confirmed what Clara already knew. Anthony Jennings was gone. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, clutching their robes against the cold night air, whispering in disbelief. "Not the Jennings," one woman gasped. "They were the perfect couple. They've been married 20 years, another muttered. "How does something like this happen?" No one had answers, only speculation, their murmurs following Clara as she was led down the steps, her wrists bound, her eyes hollow. In the back of the patrol car, Clara pressed her forehead against the glass, watching her home shrink behind her. Memories flooded her mind. The day they moved in, the dinners shared on that porch, the nights she thought she was safe in his arms. Now it was all tainted. Every memory poisoned by the truth she had unearthed. One officer sat in the front seat, stealing glances through the rearview mirror. He had seen killers before, cold, calculated, remorseless. Clara didn't fit the mold. She looked less like a murderer and more like a woman who had shattered under the weight of betrayal too heavy to bear. Back inside the house, crime scene technicians snapped photos, bagged evidence, and carefully collected the shattered remains of the wedding frame. What had once symbolized 2 decades of love was now cataloged as proof in a case of passion and death. The lead detective, arriving on scene, surveyed the room with a heavy sigh. "It always looks perfect from the outside," he muttered to a young officer beside him. "But it's what goes on behind closed doors that destroys people." At the station, Clara sat in an interrogation room, her hands folded tightly, her gaze locked on the table. The harsh fluorescent lights illuminated every tear streak on her face. She didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't demand a lawyer. She only whispered over and over, "He lied to me." For 20 years. Outside the room, officers prepared the paperwork, their voices hushed. They knew the case would draw attention. A wife killing her husband was shocking enough. But once the details of Anthony's secret surfaced, the story would explode, twisting in the media's hands, debated in living rooms across America. For now, though, only one truth mattered. Anthony Jennings was dead. Clara Jennings was in custody. And the perfect family picture had been obliterated, leaving behind nothing but fragments of betrayal and blood. By the time Clara Jennings stood trial, the story had already spread like wildfire. Local newspapers splashed her face across front pages, calling her the deceived wife. National talk shows debated the morality of the case. Was Clara a victim of 20 years of deception, or a murderer who let rage consume her? When the courthouse doors opened, the public flooded in, eager to watch the unraveling of a marriage that had once looked flawless from the outside. Camera flashes burst as deputies escorted Clara in, her wrists uncuffed, but her expression hollow. She wore a simple navy dress, her hair pulled back, her face stripped of makeup. To the world, she looked like a woman already carrying a life sentence in her eyes. Inside the courtroom, the air was tense, heavy with anticipation. Families filled the benches, reporters tapped notes on their laptops, and the jury sat stiffly, already aware they were sitting in judgment of something larger than one woman. They were deciding the meaning of betrayal, love, and murder. The judge entered, his gavel striking with a sharp crack. Court is now in session. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Linda Parker, rose first. She stepped to the center of the room, her voice calm but cutting. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about deception. It is not about secrets. It is about murder." On the night of October 23rd, Clara Jennings took a life. She struck her husband with such force that she ended him. She could have walked away. She could have called for help. But instead, she chose violence. Parker turned, pointing toward Clara, who sat silently at the defense table. "We are here because a man is dead, and no amount of excuses or revelations will bring him back." The defense attorney, Samuel Grant, stood when Parker returned to her seat. Middle-aged, with weary eyes that carried years of courtroom battles, Grant adjusted his tie and faced the jury. "What the prosecution won't tell you," he began, his voice measured, "is that this case is about deception. It's about a woman who devoted her life to a man she thought she knew, only to discover, in the most intimate and devastating way possible, that everything she believed was a lie." He paced slowly, his gaze meeting each juror. For 20 years, Clara was denied the truth. She endured rejection, secrecy, and the quiet torment of believing she was the problem in her marriage. On that night, when the lie collapsed, so did she. This was not premeditation. This was not cold-blooded murder. This was a woman who broke beneath the unbearable weight of betrayal. He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Ask yourselves, if you discovered the person you trusted most had deceived you for 2 decades, how would you react?" The first days of testimony were brutal. Crime scene photos were projected on screens. Anthony's lifeless body, the shattered frame, the blood-stained floor. Gasps rippled through the gallery as jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. Neighbors were called to testify. One woman clasped her hands tightly as she described hearing the screams. "It didn't sound like a fight. It sounded like someone's whole world collapsing," she whispered. The prosecution pressed the point. Clara's actions were intentional, violent, and final. She had options, Parker repeated. She chose murder. Then came Clara's turn to take the stand. She walked slowly, her eyes downcast, her voice trembling as she swore to tell the truth. When she sat, she looked out at the jury, 12 strangers holding her fate in their hands. Samuel Grant stood beside her, his voice gentle. "Clara, tell us what happened that night." Clara swallowed hard. "I thought my marriage was real. I thought my husband loved me the way I loved him. For 20 years, I blamed myself for the distance between us. I thought I wasn't enough, that something was wrong with me." Tears welled in her eyes as she continued. "But that night, when it fell, when I saw what he had been hiding, it was like every lie hit me all at once. I felt my whole life collapse. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't planning. I just broke. Her voice cracked. I never wanted to kill him. I wanted the truth. I just wanted the truth. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of her sobs. Even some jurors shifted, their expressions softening. But Prosecutor Parker rose for cross-examination, her tone icy. Mrs. Jennings, no one disputes that your husband kept a secret. But tell this jury, did that secret give you the right to take his life? Clara's lips quivered. I didn't mean to. Yes or no, Mrs. Jennings? Did you strike him? Yes. And did you strike him hard enough to kill him? Clara's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I wasn't thinking. Parker pressed harder. You weren't thinking, or you didn't care? The defense objected, but the damage was done. The jury now carried the weight of Clara's tears alongside the prosecution's blunt reminder. A man was dead. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered each day, holding signs. Some read justice for Anthony. Others declared Clara is a victim too. The case divided the community. Talk radio buzzed with debates, callers shouting over each other. Was she justified? Was she evil? Or was she simply human? As the trial neared its end, both sides delivered final arguments. Prosecutor Parker stood tall, her voice unwavering. This case cannot be reduced to sympathy. If we allow personal pain to justify murder, then none of us are safe. Clara Jennings chose violence. And for that choice, she must face justice. Then Grant approached, his voice quieter, more intimate. This case is not about justifying what happened. It's about understanding it. Clara Jennings is not a monster. She is a woman who gave 20 years of her life to a man who deceived her at every turn. She didn't plot this. She didn't scheme. She shattered. And when a human heart shatters, sometimes it destroys everything in its path. He paused, letting the silence stretch. She is guilty of breaking under betrayal, not of cold-blooded murder. And you must see the difference. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the entire room exhaled at once. Hours ticked by, each second heavy with uncertainty. Clara sat motionless, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes closed as if praying. Her fate now lay in the hands of 12 strangers. And when they returned, the words they spoke would decide not only her future, but how the world judged the line between deception, love, and murder. The jury filed back into the courtroom after nearly 2 full days of deliberation. The air was suffocating, thick with tension. Every creak of the benches, every shuffle of paper echoed louder than it should have. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, cameras aimed. Clara Jennings sat at the defense table, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white. She hadn't moved for hours, staring at the same crack in the wood grain. Beside her, Samuel Grant whispered, "Whatever happens, we'll face it." But Clara didn't answer. Her mind was trapped in the loop of that night. Anthony's face, the lies unraveling, the moment she lost control. The judge cleared his throat. Members of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The foreman stood, a folded slip of paper in his hand. We have, Your Honor. The paper was handed over. The judge read silently, then looked up, his face unreadable. In the matter of the state versus Clara Jennings, we, the jury, find the defendant. Clara held her breath. Not guilty of murder in the first degree. A ripple tore through the courtroom. Gasps, murmurs, the flash of cameras. Clara's chest heaved, but she couldn't exhale, not yet. The judge continued. However, on the charge of voluntary manslaughter, we find the defendant guilty. The room erupted again. Half the gallery sighed with relief, half shook their heads in outrage. The split mirrored the debate raging across the country. Was Clara a victim or a killer? Clara felt her knees weaken. Her lawyer placed a steadying hand on her arm. Manslaughter, not murder. It was a small mercy, but mercy nonetheless. When the sentence was handed down days later, Clara listened in a daze as the judge spoke. Mrs. Jennings, the court recognizes the unique and tragic circumstances surrounding this case. Yet a life was taken, and this court cannot ignore that fact. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison. 12 years. Not life. Not forever. Clara nodded faintly, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. The judge, her lawyer, or perhaps to Anthony's ghost. As deputies led her away, Clara turned one last time toward the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Strangers stared with either pity or disdain. But among them sat a neighbor she had once shared barbecues with, tears glistening in the woman's eyes. Their gazes met briefly, and in that look, Clara saw something she hadn't expected: understanding. In the weeks that followed, the case continued to dominate headlines. Talk shows dissected every angle. Some condemned Clara, insisting deception did not excuse violence. Others sympathized, saying she was as much a casualty of the lie as Anthony himself. But for Clara, the noise outside the prison walls faded into the background. What haunted her wasn't the verdict or the sentence. It was the silence in her cell at night, where she replayed her marriage like a film reel. The laughter, the meals, the anniversaries, all now tainted by betrayal. She whispered his name sometimes, hating him and missing him in equal measure. Love and rage, fused into something she could never untangle. The story of Clara and Anthony Jennings ended not with a clean resolution, but with a question, one that lingered long after the courtroom emptied and the cameras shut off. What destroys love more completely, betrayal, or the lie that sustains it? For Clara, the answer was written in blood on a bedroom floor. And for the world, her case became a cautionary tale, a haunting reminder that behind even the most perfect facades, there may lie secrets powerful enough to shatter lives beyond repair. Life inside prison stripped Clara of everything familiar. Gone were the manicured lawns of her neighborhood, the Sunday pews at church, the little rituals of domestic life she once thought would last forever. Instead, she woke each morning to the clang of metal doors and the sharp echo of guards' voices. Other inmates knew her story before she ever introduced herself. In a world where tabloids and talk shows replayed her face night after night, Clara was infamous. Some women mocked her, whispering, "That's the one who killed her husband," when she found out the truth. Others avoided her altogether, as though betrayal and blood might be contagious. At meals, she sat alone. In the yard, she walked in slow circles, staring at the barbed wire that separated her from the rest of the world. Every step reminded her that 12 years stretched ahead of her like an endless road. But the nights were the worst. Alone in her cell, she would hear the laughter of other inmates echo down the corridor, and she would clutch her blanket, whispering Anthony's name through clenched teeth. Sometimes she cursed him. Sometimes she begged for his forgiveness. Sometimes she hated herself more than she hated him. Outside prison walls, America couldn't stop talking. Talk shows invited experts to argue whether Clara was a monster or a victim. Radio hosts took calls from listeners, some insisting she got what she deserved, while others cried, "No one can understand the kind of betrayal she lived through." Neighbors who once admired the Jennings' perfect lawn now stood before cameras, trying to reconcile the woman they'd waved to at the mailbox with the woman convicted of manslaughter. One neighbor shook her head and said, "We thought they were perfect. I guess nobody ever really knows." The story even reached the lecture halls of universities, where professors used the Jennings case in debates about morality, justice, and gender. Students dissected Clara's choices, Anthony's deception, and the question that hovered like a storm cloud: what makes betrayal unforgivable? One afternoon, weeks into her sentence, Clara received a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature chilled her: Anthony's sister, Marie. The letter was short but devastating. "Clara, you may have been betrayed, but you also betrayed us. You took our brother. You took our son. Nothing can give him back. Nothing will ever make this right." Clara read it until the ink blurred with her tears. She folded it carefully, placed it under her thin prison mattress, and lay awake all night with the words seared into her chest. And yet, amid the silence and the shame, Clara sometimes imagined an alternate life. One where Anthony had trusted her with the truth from the beginning. One where she had been given the choice to stay or to leave. Would she have left? Or would she have found the strength to love him for who he really was? The questions gnawed at her, because she knew the answers no longer mattered. The choices had been stolen from her long ago, and the price of that theft was now 12 years behind bars. In the end, the Jennings case became more than a true crime story. It became a mirror, forcing people to confront the fragile foundations of trust, the devastating power of secrets, and the thin line between love and destruction. For Clara, it was a life sentence even if the calendar only said 12 years. For the world, it was a reminder whispered in every debate and every news panel. Behind every perfect smile, There may be a secret sharp enough to kill. Weeks later, Clara received something unexpected during mail call. A guard slid an envelope through the slot of her cell door. It wasn't from family, nor from any journalist hoping for an interview. The return address was simply marked, Property Division, County Evidence Locker. Inside was a single object wrapped in brown paper. When Clara peeled it back, her breath caught in her throat. It was the cracked photo frame from her bedroom. Their wedding picture, the same one she had shattered against Anthony's skull. The glass had been replaced, but the cracks in the wooden frame remained like scars. Clara stared at it for a long time. In the picture, she was smiling in her wedding gown, her hand resting proudly on Anthony's chest. They looked young, hopeful, invincible. For a moment, Clara felt her knees weaken, as though the past had reached out and crushed her all over again. She placed the frame on the narrow metal shelf beside her bunk. At night, the faces seemed to glow faintly in the pale light from the corridor. She found herself talking to it in whispers. Sometimes she begged the Clara in the photo to run, to see the truth before it was too late. Other times, she pleaded with Anthony's image to tell her why he had chosen deception over honesty, why he had stolen the choice from her. The other inmates noticed. "You still talking to that picture, Jennings?" One woman sneered from across the cell block. Clara didn't answer. She only turned the frame toward the wall, hiding it from their eyes. But she couldn't hide from herself. One evening, as lights dimmed and silence settled over the prison, Clara turned the frame face down. For the first time, she felt the strange urge to let go, not of Anthony, but of the woman she used to be. The wife who smiled through every doubt. The woman who accepted excuses. The woman who lived in the dark. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she whispered, "You died with him." In that moment, she realized that part of her had indeed died the night Anthony's secret fell to the floor. What remained was a hollowed-out version, serving 12 years in a cage that felt more emotional than physical. Months later, during a routine cell inspection, a guard lifted the frame and frowned at the cracks running through the wood. "You want me to throw this out?" he asked. Clara shook her head firmly. "No, that stays." Because as broken as it was, the frame was the only thing that told the whole story. Love, lies, rage, and ruin, all captured in one image. And every night, when the prison settled into uneasy sleep, Clara lay awake, the fractured photo standing silent watch over her. It was not forgiveness. It was not closure. It was simply the reminder that even the strongest vows can splinter into shards sharp enough to draw blood.